Welcome back, everyone. Today I started playing in the quarterfinals of the Chess Global Championship being held in Toronto, Canada. Now, there are 8 players vying to win the grand prize of $200,000 along with the title. Now, those 8 players are myself, Jan-Krzysztof Duda, Sam Sevian, Nihal Sarin, Dmitry Andreikin, Wesley So, and then we also have Anish Giri and Teimur Rajbov. So very, very serious event. The matches that are being played are 8 games, and they are in a knockout format. So in this quarterfinals, I'm started by playing against Jan-Krzysztof Duda, the very talented Polish player, who I also played, by the way, in the candidates as well. So in the first game, I start out with the white pieces. So away we go. So I start by playing e4. Duda plays e5. I play knight f3, and now he plays knight f6, essaying the classic Petrov defense here. Now, I must add that one of the great things about not playing all that much classical chess is that I have had a lot of ideas that I prepared for the candidates tournament all the way back in July in Madrid that I have not used. So this was not a big surprise for me. And unfortunately, before the game began, I was able to review those files and I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do. So I play knight takes e5 here. Duda plays d6. I go knight to f3. Knight takes e4, d4, d5, bishop d3, and now he plays bishop f5. I castle. Bishop e7, rook e1 castles, knight d2. All this very, very standard. It's been played before. Duda plays knight d6. I go knight f1. Plays c6. I play bishop f4 here. We trade. He goes knight a6, h4, knight c7, knight g5, g6, knight e3, queen d7, h5. And this is the first moment where Duda deviates from a previous game. Now, in a previous game that Duda played, I believe it was against Wesley So, if I'm not mistaken, he played this move knight c to e8, which is not considered a particularly strong move. After knight f3, knight to g7, h takes g6, f takes g6, and bishop h2. Computers give white a fairly substantial advantage. So I suspect that Duda recalled the game, and he chose to deviate here by playing pawn to f5. Now, this move is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's a very thin line that Black has to walk here, because after I play this knight h3 move, well, Duda plays knight e6, I go pawn takes pawn. Now, the thing that's really, really difficult to understand about this position, and again, with a weak engine and not a supercomputer, it's very hard to figure out what the best move is. But the best move here for Black is to actually play this move pawn to g5. Now, this looks very, very weird here, but the problem is that after bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, knight takes g5, f4, knight f1, and queen f5, Black is still slightly worse here, but Black has very good drawing chances in the long term. So I was very happy to see this line because I already knew that g5 was the only move where I thought Black was close to equal based on the preparation I did back in June and July for the candidates. And so when Duda played knight e6, I was very happy. Those of you who were watching the broadcast probably saw me tilt my head because this move felt wrong to me during the game. So now I play h takes g6, h takes g6, and I go knight to g4 here. Now again, this is very, very good. As you'll see, if Black plays pawn takes knight, I have queen takes pawn check, knight to g7, and now I have the bone crusher, rook takes e7, queen e7, and knight to g5 here. And there's not really a whole lot that Black can do in this position. If Black plays rook takes f4, he gets checkmated because queen h7 check attacks the king. King cannot go to f7, king f8 is the only move, and now queen h8 would be checkmate. The king simply has no squares. So in this position after knight g5, the only move Black can play is queen takes g5, but after queen takes g5, knight e4, queen takes g4, white has a queen for a rook and a knight, but I also have a couple of extra pawns on the king side, and it's completely hopeless. So after knight g4, what you'll notice is the problem for Black is that there's some weaknesses. e5 is a big weakness, h6 is a threat, and also I have this rook on the e file, which puts a lot of pressure on the knight on e6 and the bishop on e7. So Duda goes knight to f7 here, trying to prevent knight e5, but the problem is that now after knight e5 takes and bishop takes e5, Black really is in trouble. I can stack the rooks on the e-file, rook e2 and rook e1. There's maybe ideas like queen g3 here. And Black really cannot contest for any of the squares in the center. And with this pawn structure and this huge weakness on e5, this should already be technically lost for Black. So Duda plays rook a e8. Now I go rook e2. Clean idea of creating the classic double stack on the e-file. He plays bishop to d8. I go rook a e1. And now he plays g5. Now again, hard to really fault Duda here. He's trying very hard to hang on. I actually during the game I thought he might be able to play something like knight g5. Although apparently, oh wait, no, this just loses, takes on queen g3, never mind. But instead he plays g5, and now I very calmly play f3. The reason is very simple here. The idea that I have in mind is I want to go c3, consolidate the connect 4 here in the center of the board, and then eventually move the bishop, or maybe play g4 or f4. Even ideas long-term, like just to illustrate the point, there are even ideas long-term to do something like knight to f2, and then rook to h1 and trying to break through on the h file. So I felt here it was very important to stay calm. I was already up quite a bit of time on the clock, so you just want to make sure you don't do anything stupid. So Duda plays a6, now I go c3, consolidating the chain, also guarding the pawn on d4 so I can remove the bishop from e5, plays rook f7, and now I go knight to f2. Now this may not be the best move, actually. When I played this I was kind of unhappy because I initially missed knight f8. I thought after knight to f2 I was in very good shape, because say black plays, let's just say a random move like a5. There's some very nasty ideas like knight to g4 here with knight h6 threats, and if black takes, I go check, knight g7, I take, and after rook e2, rook e2, rook g7, and rook e8, I simply win the game because I have a queen for a rook. So instead, Duda chooses to play knight to f8 here. Very good move, by the way, trying to put the knight on g6. So now I go queen d2, knight g6, and realizing that nothing's going to happen on the h file, I now reroute my knight to d3. I have ideas like knight c5, or even to put the knight on e5. So Duda goes rook h7, I go knight to c5, queen to f7, and now I go bishop d6. Very important move here because I have this great knight on c5 targeting the pawns on b7 and a6. And additionally, I just have to make sure there are no mating threats on the h file. And if I control the open e file, this should be game over. So Duda trades, and now he goes bishop to b6, and here I used a bit of time trying to come up with the best move. I initially did not want to play knight takes b7. I actually thought I could play queen e8, but I wasn't 100% sure what was happening in this endgame. After king f7, rook b8, takes, rook takes b7, and king e6, rook h7, bishop d6, rook a7, and I assumed that I should be winning in the long term here, but I was not 100% sure, and I thought, you know what, this one, it's going to be easy for Duda to play. He knows what he has to try to do with only the bishop and the knight versus the rook in an endgame, and I thought the other option I had would keep it much more complicated. So I decided to take on b7. He takes the knight, queen e8 check, king g7, and now I go bishop to f8 check, knight takes f8, rook to e7 check, he takes, king g8, I take again, and at this point the smoke is kind of cleared. What you'll see here is black has a rook, a knight, and a bishop for the queen, but I have a queen as well as 3 additional pawns, so I assumed that this had to be winning. So now I go king f1, which is an important move because black has a very nasty idea here, which is, say I play something like a4, he can go bishop g3, and after a5, their idea is like rook e7, trying to create a checkmate on e1 with the bishop and the rook. So I go king f1 here. Idea is very simple. Now if black goes bishop to g3, I'm just going to run the king out towards the queen side, and there will no longer be any checkmating threats. So he goes rook to e7, trying to cut off the king here, and now I play queen to g5. Important, by the way, that I don't play f4. This would be a blunder, because now black can play bishop takes pawn, and after queen takes bishop, there's rook f7, and black would be winning. So I very quietly massage the position, I check, and after king f7, now I go f4, because after bishop f4, queen takes f4, there is no rook f7 move. So Duda plays king e8, I go g3 here, just consolidating the pawns here, plays knight e6, queen g6, king d7, now I go king f2, and here he plays knight to d8. Now, during the game, I actually was a little bit unsure how much better this position would be if he had played something like bishop d8 with the idea of going knight c7 to b5 to d6 to e4. But fortunately he plays knight d8, which I think is wrong because the idea is still to go to d6 and e4, but now I'm able to play check and c4 here, and black is no longer going to be able to get an outpost on e4 because he has to take, and now after d5 takes, rook d6, queen c4, there's no outpost in the center for this knight anymore without any pawns. So after queen c4, he goes knight e6, and now I go king f3. Worth noting, by the way, Duda very low on time here, so very tough to draw this position. He checks, I go king g2, now he goes pawn to a5, and now I play this move b4. The reason is very simple. After pawn takes, queen takes, I have a queen and 3 pawns for a rook, a bishop, and a knight, but I have pawns that are split. This is the first example in the match where we have some wide peepos. So after queen takes b4, he goes bishop b6, now I try to distract him with a pawn on the queen side, goes king c7, a5, bishop a7, and now I go queen b2, just a quiet waiting move to see what he's going to do. Plays knight c6, now I go a6, bishop d4, I check, king d8, and now I play g4. With the knight and the bishop tied down to this a7 square, I now start to push the pawns on the other side of the board, and the rest is pretty hopeless. Duda goes rook e6, g5, check, king f3, he checks, I go king e4, plays rook c2, and after g6 he resigns, because again, even with the wooden shield here, he can't really stop both of these, both the a and the g pawns. One of them's going to get through, or he's going to have to sacrifice some material, and it's simply hopeless. So Duda resigns the first game, and with that, I take a commanding 1-0 lead. So let's move on to the second game now. So in the second game, I'm starting off here with the black pieces. Obviously, Duda having lost the first game, he wants to get back into the match. So he starts by playing d4. I go knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, g3. Now, it's worth noting for those of you guys who've seen many of my games online and over the board, one of the lines I generally play a lot of is bishop e7, bishop g2, castles, castles, dc4, queen c2, and b5. In fact, I actually had a game, I believe entitled Tuesday against Duda in this exact position. But this time around, I thought, you know what? Life is short. You want to have some fun, maybe mix it up a little bit. I thought he would probably play the Catalan, so I prepared a line that I had seen mentioned on Twitter. I forget who the guy was who mentioned this line, but somebody on Twitter mentioned a line with d takes c4 and knight bd7, and I thought, you know what? It's a very interesting try. Why not play it? So Duda castles, I play c6 here. He goes a4, I play a5, knight c3. Pretty normal so far. Black is temporarily up a pawn, but white is trying to build a big center with e4 and d4. So I go bishop b4, queen c2, I castle, and now Duda plays knight a2. Now, it's worth noting that I had not reviewed this specific line before the game, and I immediately go wrong here. What I should have done was I should have played bishop to d6, and after queen takes c4, played e5 to try and strike in the center. And this is actually pretty standard mainline theory here for both sides. Nothing too exciting. But during the game, for some reason, I felt like this order had to be slightly wrong, and so I play this move b6. Duda decides to go knight d2, which is definitely not the right move. What he should have played here was he actually should have played sort of the somewhat counterintuitive move rook d1, because now if I go bishop a6, there's this very nasty move knight to e5, and I have trouble guarding the pawn on c6. If I trade on e5 after takes knight d5 and e4, I can simply resign the game. And if I go knight d7 here, this also should just be losing after takes, rook a7, and I believe queen d2, or maybe not queen d2, maybe there's something better, but this looks really, really bad for black. At any rate, instead, Duda plays knight d2, which kind of took me by surprise, because now I can trade, and now I play knight d5, e4, and knight e7, and I remain up a pawn here, because if white takes on c4, I have bishop a6 to collect the rook on f1. So at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I actually thought I shouldn't be that much worse, because the knight is kind of out of play, and I felt like the knight should be able to contest some central squares pretty quickly, but alas, I was quite wrong. So Duda goes rook d1, rook f d1, I play bishop a6, bishop g5, now I go h6, bishop f4, and here I kind of start to lose the thread. In this position, what I should have done is I should have played this move pawn to b5 here, because after a takes b5 in this position, I can take, and after d5, e5, let's just say bishop e3, b4, black is doing very, very well here. Now, it's very important to note, because sort of at this point, I didn't really sense the danger. I thought, you know, I could kind of take my time, ho-hum, fiddle-dee-dum, and there should really not be any problems. So I play knight f6 instead. He goes knight c3, and now the problems become very apparent here, because now if I ever try to go b5 after takes, and I think d5 here, if I take, there's e5, and there's massive pressure here in the center, and I'm in a lot of trouble. So instead I play knight to g6, Duda goes bishop to e3, now I play queen to c7, goes h3. Very simple idea here to play f4, g4, build a Great Wall of China on the 4th rank. I play rook a d8, plays f4, rook e8, and now I found this with queen f2. Now, right around this point in the game, I started to realize there were problems, because initially here I still thought I was doing fine. I felt like he can't go g4 because the f4 pawn hangs. If he ever plays e5, I get a great knight on d5, and f5 also isn't possible, because after takes, you lose the bishop on e3. So I was feeling very, very good here, and then queen f2 is played, and I suddenly realized that at this point, I'm in a lot of trouble. The reason I'm in trouble is quite simple. White can now play g4 because the queen and the bishop guard the pawn. White can also play for f5 because there's queen takes f5, and white can also play for d5 because of the weak pawn on b6. So queen f2 is an excellent move. And around this point, I started to realize that there is serious danger. So I play knight d7 here, anticipating d5, because now the knight will guard the pawn. After takes c5, black should be okay. So instead, Duda goes e5. Now I play knight to e7. Goes g4, and now I play this move f5. Now, right around here, I actually thought that I was completely fine. In fact, I thought with the pawn on f5 and no knight e4 jumps to d6 or f6, I might even have winning chances. But I was obviously very mistaken, as you guys can see from the valuation, because the problem is now that the g file is going to open up, and white is going to try to stack and attack down towards my king on g8. So after f5, he goes rook d2. I play rook f8. Goes king h2. Idea very simple, to play rook g1 and eventually bring the other rook to g2. Play rook f7 here. Now, what I should have done is I should have probably taken and played c5. And initially, I thought this was okay, but for some reason, when I looked at this during the game, I got scared of something here. I think I just got scared of a simple move like rook a d1, and after takes, I didn't see the continuation. Although apparently knight g6 is winning here. So I should have done this, but at any rate, I did consider this, but I didn't see a way to do something immediately, so I thought that I should try and just stay solid and not simplify the position. So I play rook f7, rook g1, king h7. Again, all pretty normal. He goes bishop f3. I play g6, queen h4, rook h8. Rook h8 obviously important because here white is threatening to potentially play g5. So by going rook h8, if white now goes g5, I can go h5 to clog the king side. And if he ever takes, I just sidestep with my king, and now white will lose either the bishop on h5 or the queen on h4. So Duda plays rook dg2, creating the double stack, and this is very, very difficult to play. Luckily, I was still up on time at this point in the game. So I go knight f8 here, trying to overprotect my g6 pawn with both knights, and also maybe ideas like taking with e pawn and jumping with the knight from f8 to e6. So he goes queen f2, I play bishop b7, goes queen e2. Now, this was actually a mistake. It was at this point that h4 would have been very strong. I was actually very worried about this. I was going to take, and I was sort of praying that after bishop g4, c5, I would have enough play here, although apparently after knight b5, queen d7, knight d6, I'm just getting absolutely destroyed. But I was hoping that I would have enough play with bishop b7, but I wasn't really sure. I just played it because we were both getting low on time, and I thought, go for complications. So I was very lucky that Duda did not play this. Instead, he plays queen e2. Now, this is not necessarily a bad move, but the problem is now white is not really attacking as much. White is trying to shift back to a positional plan by winning the pawn on c4. So now I go queen to d8, plays queen takes c4, and now I take... And I play knight f5, bishop f2, and b5. And already here, I was starting to feel actually quite good about the position, because if white trades, suddenly there's a double attack. The queen on c4 is under attack, as well as the bishop on f3. Additionally, I have this great knight outposted on f5 as well. So already here, I was starting to feel kind of confident. Now, the funny thing is, computer obviously just laughs at me and says, what are you smoking? White is completely winning. But we're both getting low on time, position's starting to simplify, my moves are becoming a little bit clearer, and so I was already getting kind of optimistic. So Duda goes queen d3, now I play c5, sort of a desperation try to just complicate or simplify, but make sure that some pieces are coming off the board. So Duda trades, and now he makes a mistake. He decides to take the pawn on b5. Now white is still much better here, but in this position, if white moves the queen either to e4 f3, this should be winning, because once I move, let's just say my queen to c8, after d takes c5, white's going to get a protected pass pawn on c5 here, and even if I take on a4 after knight a4 and knight b6, with this protected pawn on c5 that can go up the board, I still have this big weakness on g6. I can't really get the rook into the game easily. It's going to take a lot of time. White should be winning. Now, the reason this is important is because when Duda takes on b5, after c takes d4, knight to e4, queen to b8, white is still winning here. Make no mistake about it, but now white is not getting a protected pass pawn. If white takes the d pawn, I will win the b pawn, and sure, I'm probably losing, but I'm hanging in there just for the time being. So Duda plays knight d6 here, which I think is a very strong move. I go rook g7, he takes on d4, I go rook g8 here. At this point, I'm completely lost, obviously. I could not, by the way, take on d6 either, because if I take on d6 after rook takes g6, I'm just getting completely crushed here. Knight f5, rook takes e6, and it's a total disaster. So rook g7 takes, I go rook hg8, Duda plays knight to e4, I go knight to d7, trying to stop this knight f6 check. He goes bishop to f2, and now I play rook to f8. Not really a clear-cut plan, but the idea is simply I want to move the knight without getting forked by knight f6. So he goes queen c4, I play queen b7, and now Duda makes a mistake. He plays queen c6. Now, this isn't like a terrible move, obviously. White is still much better. But after rook b8, it gets very tricky to play for white. And at this point, I think there's already only one clear move, which is just winning on the spot, which is rook to d1, targeting the knight on d7, because you still have this idea with knight f6. Instead, Duda trades, and once he trades here, at this point, I started to feel very confident about the position, because now queens are off the board. I've got a great outposted knight. The pawn on b5 is weak, and already here I started to think there would be chances to win. Duda plays knight c3, and now I go knight to b6, and it's, again, very tricky here, because what white would love to do is trade and then go rook d1 to stop knight d4, taking the pawn on b5, but now there's knight e3, which forks the rooks on g4 and d1. So it's a little bit tricky already here, and if you go rook g2, knight d4, again, the pawn is going to hang on b5, and it's hard to really say that white is winning here. White still is better, but in blitz scramble, where players are getting low on time, you already feel like the advantage is gone, because you can't calculate for all that long. So instead, Duda plays rook d1. I go knight to c4 here. He plays rook d8, and now I play rook d7, again trying to swap off another set of rooks. He goes rook c8, and now I blunder here playing rook to d2. What I should have played was knight c to e3. If I'd played this move, I don't know if I would have won the game, but it would have been very tricky because the only move here that white can, well, I guess there are two moves, but the best move is to play knight to e4 here, and after king g7, there's takes, and knight d6, and after knight takes g4, white can maybe take on g4 or take on b7. Wait, white can't take on b7. It's check. What am I thinking? But after takes and rook b6 here, black should be able to salvage the game and make a draw. Instead, I played rook d2, completely missing knight to e4. And as soon as knight e4 is played, I was very unhappy because it targets the rook on d2, it guards the bishop on f2, it also lets white attack the knight on c4, and there's knight to f6 check as well, with ideas like rook g8 and potential checkmates. So after knight e4 is played, I played rook c2. Computer actually says after knight b6, this amazing move. Black is still very much in the game, but it's a very, very tough move to find. So instead I play rook c2, Duda goes king c1, I check, he goes back, I go rook c2, and now he makes a mistake by playing b3. What he should have played here was rook g2, and after rook g2, I probably have to play knight e3, but now after rook takes c2, knight d6, I probably have to trade, and with this pass pawn going, with the two pass pawns going up the board, this should be a technical win for white. One illustrative example is takes, d7, rook d5, and now bishop to b6 with the idea of playing d8, or if I take the pawn, I lose the knight on c2. Again, both of us very low on time here, very complicated, so you can't really fault Duda, but he plays b3, and now after knight e3, it's very tricky, because after takes, the only move that's winning here for white is knight to d6, and very, very counterintuitive. The reason that it's winning is after takes, rook b5, again, there's a very nice move, rook to g3, the idea is to put the rook behind the pawn, and if I go rook d5, there's rook c3 with the idea of rook c7, d7, and rook c8. Again, very, very complicated with only mere seconds left on the clock, almost impossible to find because rook g3 is not an intuitive move. So Duda does not play knight d6, instead he goes knight f6, and now after king g7, the advantage is completely gone. Plays b6, I go knight to c to e3 here, cutting off the bishop from guarding the pawn, and after rook g1, rook takes b6, the smoke has finally cleared to the point where I'm no longer in danger of losing. So he goes knight e8 check, I go king h7, goes rook c1, probably should have played check and tried to make a repetition, but instead he plays rook c1, now I go g5 here, important because if I take on b3, after rook c7, if I were to play king h8, there's a classic Arabian checkmate with knight f6 and rook h7, and if I go king g8, after knight f6, king f8, black is probably okay, but it's very, very scary. You know, if this bishop could ever get on anywhere on this diagonal from a3 to f8, it would be checkmate. So intuitively, I don't want to allow this, so I play this move, g5 here, creating space for the king to run up to g6. Duda checks, king g6, he takes. Now he plays rook g7, and after king f5, black is starting to take over. Duda decides to check, I go king e4, he checks, I go king d5, he goes king g3, and now after rook takes b3, black is simply up a pawn, and now it's going to be very, very difficult for white to hang on. Duda plays rook d7, I decide to take, he takes back, I go knight g2, king g4, and now I take the pawn on e5, and he plays knight c4 check. Now, he could have gone knight f7 as well to win the pawn on h6, but of course, for us humans, it makes more sense to take the pawn, which is on the outside and further away. So knight c4, king f6, and now he takes. Now, at this point, both of us have finally reached this moment where it's kind of simplified, but unfortunately, right here, I relax. At this point, there's an instant win with pawn to h5 check. King does not have any squares except to take the pawn. After rook b4, white will have to give a lot of material to prevent rook h4 checkmate. Again, as I said, right around this moment here, when I played king f6, I relaxed, and I thought, you know what, the danger is completely gone. Now we reset, and I try to win this endgame with a rook knight in 2 versus a rook knight in 1. So he takes, I go rook b6, goes rook d2, I check, I go knight e3 here, idea to play either knight f1 or knight f5 check. Plays rook f2, knight f5, king h2, and now I play rook a4, knight b3, rook e4. Again, at this point, both of us on mere seconds, so not a whole lot to say. Just making some shuffling moves. And eventually around here, I start to finally bring my king closer to where the white king is, and now I prepare to push the e pawn forward. So he goes king g2, I play e5, check, king e4, he checks, and now I go king f4. King is completely shielded here, there are no checks from the side, and trying to go from behind is possible, but I'm going to play rook e2 and force his king to the back rank. So he plays knight f7, I go h5 here, rook a6, now I check again, And now I play this move, pawn to e4. Important move because this pawn is very, very fast going up the board. And after rook f6 check, for example, king e3, he cannot trade because after takes and king f1, I have knight f5 with the idea of knight g3 and then f2, f1, winning the game. So he plays rook a4, but now after rook g3, he goes king f1. I play knight to f5 here, trying to box out this knight. There are no jumps anymore. No jumps to d6, h6, g5, or e5. And he plays knight to d8, and now I go king f3, threatening to play knight e3, and he plays king e1 here, which loses on the spot. Computer says after knight f7, it's only minus about 3, but I should win anyway. Instead, he plays king e1, and after rook g1 check, king d2, e3, king d3, rook d1 check, king c2, rook takes d8. Duda resigns the second game, and with that, I take a very commanding 2-0 lead. So, up 2-0, we go into the third game. Now, I had a couple of thoughts going into this game. I decided to play e4, and the reason I did this is I figured Duda down 2-0, even though it's 8 games, it feels very short. It feels like it's getting late early, to use the classic, I think Yogi Berra saying. And I felt like he would either switch up with something with an e5 and play knight c6, not the Petrov, or play Sicilian. So he plays e5, knight f3, he goes knight c6, bishop b5, and he plays knight f6, essaying the classic Berlin defense. Now, once again, this is something that I was ready for if he had played this against me in the candidates, and so I used one of the ideas that I had in mind during the event. So I played d3, bishop c5, c3, and now he plays d5, we trade, I go bishop c4, queen d6, all very standard, by the way. Knight bd2, bishop f5, targeting the pawn on d3, b4, bishop b6, knight g5, threatening to fork the queen and the rook. He decides to castle, knight e4, takes, trade the queens, check, king c2, h6, knight f3, bishop f2, rook f1, bishop b6, a4, a6, knight h4. Now, up to this point, this had all been played before in a game of Duda's. He had this with black against Niels Grandelius, the Swedish grandmaster, but Niels in that game played this move, bishop a3, which is not the best move. Now, having looked at this before the candidates, there's this idea with knight h4, which even with the weaker engines does not show up as a top move for the computer, but once you let it think, it starts to realize how difficult this position is. Now, one other funny fact is that after the match had ended today, I actually spoke very briefly with Fabiano Caruana, another very strong grandmaster from the United States of America, and I actually asked him, are you aware of this line? And he said, of course. I think he said something like, of course I'm aware of it, or he had seen it. I don't remember the exact words he used, but he was aware of this idea. Now, the great thing for me is that when I played this, Duda started to sink into a think. Now, what this means is that he was not aware of what the best moves are, and in fact, it's very tricky here, because there are a couple lines. There's knight e7, knight e8, and bishop e6. Now, bishop e6 is one of the lines which probably is okay for a computer, but after takes, knight f3, let's just say rook d8, rook a2, followed by king b3 and rook d2. Black is temporarily up a pawn here, but he has these double stacked pawns on e6 and e5, which are not all that great. So instead, he plays knight d8. Now, one of the main moves that I looked at was also knight e7 here, but knight d8 I knew was not the best line. So here I play a5, and in this position I was thinking a bit, I was trying to figure out, do I want to play a5 or knight f5 first? Now, ultimately, the reason I rejected knight f5 is I thought that after knight f5, he could throw in this little move a5, forcing me to play b5 before potentially taking. And here, for example, after bishop c5, I think white is still better here, but I wasn't so convinced with this fixed pawn structure on the queen side of a4, b5 versus a5. So I thought, you know what, why not just fix the structure myself first and then go knight f5 so he has no a5. Additionally, in endgames, now the pawns are fixed on the light squares, so they should be easier to target with the bishop on c4. So Duda plays knight e6. Now, this is just a blunder here, but it's already very hard to play. The computer, as it starts to think, is going to realize that white is much better than it appears on first glance. But probably the best move that black can play here is something like bishop h5. But again, there are ideas like bishop a3, there's h3, g4, and black is just very, very passive here, so white should have a significant advantage. Instead, Duda plays knight e6. Now, the reason this is a blunder that it automatically leads to a forced opposite color bishop endgame, where black is just hoping that it's a draw and he's not completely lost. So I play bishop takes h6 here. He takes the knight. If he were to take the bishop here, I just take the pawn, and now there's a fork. And after king h8, knight g4, white is simply up an extra pawn here on g2 or h2, and the game is completely over. So he has to go bishop takes f5, but now I take with the pawn. He takes my bishop, I take his knight, we trade, and after rook d1 here, I think this position is already technically lost, because the problem is black has to either trade all the rooks off or allow me to infiltrate either on d7 with rook d7, or potentially to infiltrate on f7. Say rook e8, check, and bishop c4 here, or bishop d5 for that matter. I think bishop d5 probably is better. It's very, very hard for black to play here. This queen side is very, very weak, and I think technically this should be lost. So Duda chooses to take the more practical option by playing rook f8, but the problem is now you're just hoping that you aren't lost. Now, as we'll notice, now me having thrown in this a4, a5 move pays huge dividends here, because I'm going to win a pawn on the queen side, whereas if the structure was different, say, let me just go back and illustrate it with slightly different position. Let's say we reach some position like, actually, let's say we reach this position just to illustrate it. This would actually be a simple draw here, because after takes, rook f8, takes, bishop c8. There are a couple ways for black to draw bishop g1, but even if you disregard that, something like e4 takes and e3, this also should be a draw with perfect play. Whereas in the game, it's not actually very clear-cut what black's plan is, because when we reach this position after bishop c8, he has to play b6, and after takes, probably the best line for black to play here is to trade on a5, but the big issue is quite simple. In this position, we're going to have some wide peepos. I'm going to be able to create two outside pass pawns here. Additionally, the big problem for black is this e-pawn can be blockaded from the bishop on e2. So say black goes e4 and e3. The problem here is that the bishop always guards the pawns, and I can run my king towards the king side and then start creating a second pass pawn. So to illustrate it, something like this, and h4, and if black goes king e6, now I can just go check, and if he runs this way, I go to d5, c6, and b7, and with the bishop preventing the e-pawn from moving forward, this is just completely lost. So black is really at this point just hoping that he's not completely lost here, but there really are no guarantees, and I think if the computer thinks with more depth, it probably will say that white is winning, because white is going to get some wide peepos again. So Duda plays c5, which essentially loses on the spot. Like I said, he should have taken, but I understand why he did this. The idea is very simple. He wants to end up in a situation where I only have one pawn on the board. Because if we go back to this position after takes, I now have two pawns on the board on the queen side. So for example, there are never going to be any ideas where to illustrate some point, there are never going to be any ideas where, how does he do this even? I'm trying to figure this out, where basically you get some position, I'm just going to illustrate this, let's just say something like this. There are never any chances for this endgame being a draw, because I have the pawn on I have two pawns on the queen side. So Duda plays c5 with the idea of trying to get it to where I only have a single pawn on the queen side. Unfortunately, this does lose, because I found this great idea with bishop b5 here, and now he takes on b4. He had to take on a5, but after pawn takes, this is losing because now the pawn also blocks the bishop. There's no scope. So say he goes e4, a6, king e7, for example. Now I can play something like king d2 and king e3, or actually, yeah, king d2 and king e3 should be winning, or even potentially something like c4, bringing the king to the queen side, and eventually this will just be lost for black. To illustrate, I do something like this, and now I start to use the pawns on the king side as well. I can play just h3 here, and inevitably at some point I'm going to be able to run my king up the queen side and get to b7. So the logic is there, but the problem is after bishop b5, he decides to take because he realizes it's bad, so he takes on b4. But now the very nasty move pawn to a6 here, which basically leaves this bishop on a7 sitting in the corner, and black is just lost because after pawn takes, I go g4. Maybe not the only move that's required, but the idea is very simple here. Again, bishop on b5 always covers the e2 square, so the pawn can never move forward. And now after king e7, h4, if he goes king d6 to try to dislodge the bishop from b5, I can simply take, and after king c5, I go g5, takes. If he takes the bishop, I go g6, and black can't stop the wide peepos. And if black doesn't go to c5, say he plays like king e6 here, eventually what's going to happen is I'm going to run my king, let's just illustrate it. I can even play something like this, where I run the king straight to b7, and black just loses the game immediately, because the bishop has no squares, because the pawn is in the way, so you can't move on the diagonal. So after playing g4, Duda actually resigns here because he realizes there's no way to stop me from basically getting a queen on the king side, or being able to simply run my king all the way up to b7. And with that, I take a commanding, I should say I use commanding after second game, but I take an overwhelming 3-0 lead in the match. So now we move to the fourth and final game. So in the fourth and final game, let me flip the board, I have the black pieces. I'm up 3-0, feeling very good, and I don't really know what Duda will choose to do. So in this position, Duda starts with e3. Now, he plays e3, and it was very hard for me on first glance to tell whether this was a mouse slip or intentional, but when I looked up, because basically we're on monitors facing each other, I just looked like this just to see his face, because you can see it, and it did not appear to be a mouse flip. So as soon as I looked and I saw it didn't appear to be a mouse flip, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go e5. If I had perceived it to be a mouse flip, like he'd been shaking his head a lot, I probably would have played e6, hoping that he would play e4, and then I would have played e5, and we just get a normal position. But it was very clear to me, based on his reaction, that it was not a mouse flip, and he intended to play it. So I thought, you know what, I'll just play e5 here. So now Duda shocks me by playing king e2, essaying the classic Bongcloud opening. Now, many of you guys have seen my speed runs. It is an opening you can play, but in such a situation where you're down 3-0 and you're trying to claw your way back in the match and there's a lot of money on the line, it's probably not the best choice, because obviously, from my standpoint, I don't have to play along with the meme, and I choose not to. So I play d5, he goes d4, I play knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, all very standard. Plays f3 here, trying to go king f2 and eventually bring out the bishop to b5 or d3 and play knight e2. And of course, I'm aware of this because obviously, having done my Bongcloud speedruns, I know what the general themes are when you play like this. So I go bishop d6, he plays king f2, and now I decide to castle. Duda plays knight e2. I play queen e7. Very simple reasoning behind playing queen e7, which is that I want to stop him from playing knight g3 and bring his bishop into the game, because now I can trade and take the pawn on d4. And if he recaptures his knight, I have bishop c5, winning the queen. So Duda instead plays knight b5, bishop b4, c3. I go bishop a5, he plays a4, I play bishop b6. Again, I don't want to lose my bishop here if I play something like h6. There's b4, bishop b6, and then a5 trapping the bishop on b6. So I play bishop b6, Duda plays h3, I play a6, kicking the knight out of b5, but also creating a square on a7 for my bishop. Knight a3 is played, I play knight to e8 here. Now the idea behind knight e8 is very simple. I play knight e8 because I actually am mildly concerned that white is going to go g4 and knight g3. And now if white goes g4, I have queen h4, but I also can just play f5, trying to open up the f file as well. So Duda plays b4, I go knight d6, now he goes g3. Again, obviously g4 is always met by f5. Now I play rook e8, rook a2, and here I go queen f6, king g2, and bishop to f5. Now, the idea behind bishop f5 is very simple. I want to bring my rook into the game. Now, what I'd love to do is I'd love to stack the two towers, create the double stack on the e file, but the bishop's in the way, so I go to f5 for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to keep an eye on these squares c2 and b1 to keep the knight on a3 out of the game. As we know, knights on the rim are dim. And secondly, of course, I want to do the double stack with rook e7 and rook e8 potentially. So he goes g4, go bishop g6, knight g3, and now I play this move h5. Now, I don't know if this is the best move, but already at this point, I was kind of the mindset that I wanted to sack something. So if he were to take, I would have actually sacked here, and after knight h5, I was going to play queen g5, actually not queen g5, sorry, queen g6, knight g3, and then knight f5 to put pressure on the knight on g3, and after queen to e1 here, I was going to play e takes d4, takes, and I'm not sure if I was going to take with a knight or the bishop, but I felt like something bad is happening here. For white, even knight takes d4, you have knight h4, f3 and e3 are weak, there's a pin, and I just assumed this had to be good, so that's why I played h5, because I was thinking that he would take. After a long think, Duda decides to play rook g1 and not take the bait. I go h4, plays knight e2, and now here I play the strange move rook a8. Now the reason I did this is that I thought I could double stack with rook to e7 here, but after rook to e7, there was something I was worried about. I'm not sure what. Maybe it's just queen e1 and queen f2. And I didn't really see how, I guess here I have knight e4, but I didn't see how I was breaking through on the e file. So I thought that at this point, I could go rook d8 because I had another idea in mind, which is to put this knight on c4 and then play on both the d and the e files. So Duda plays bishop d2. Now I go knight c4. He has to trade. Plays a5, bishop a7, and now he goes queen e1. Already here, though, the problem is that white's in a lot of trouble. You have this weak pawn on f3, so you can't really move the king because you lose the pawn. You also can't really push the pawn from e3 because then the d file opens up and there are all kinds of problems. And additionally, you can't move the d pawn. So white's kind of stuck here, and it's really up to me when do I want to open up the center with pawn takes d4. Additionally, I can also sneak the bishop in with bishop to d3 as well. So at this point, I think it's pretty much hopeless for any human. Maybe a computer could still find some magical way to survive, but for a human, it's pretty much lost. So Duda plays queen e1. I go bishop to d3, creating a wooden shield, of course. Classic wooden shield, as we all know. Plays queen f2, and now I play knight to e7. Now, already here, I knew there had to be some way to win on the spot, but I thought, you know what, there's no need to rush it. I can just put this knight on d5 where it will target everything, the pawns on e3, c3, and b4, and white can't really do anything here because all his pieces are on the first two ranks. So Duda plays knight c1. Now I decide to trade, and I go knight to d5 here. And the thing is, as soon as I played this move, I actually did realize that Duda could play e4. Unfortunately for me, he didn't play it, because as soon as I played this move, I realized, wait, white can actually go e4 here. So if I go knight e7, white can take, and just like that, suddenly there are all kinds of problems. I probably have to actually take the pawn and make a draw here. So this was a big miss for Duda to not see this move. But again, at this point, I suspect that Duda thought if he played e4, I could take with the pawn, or maybe even just sack, do something like this with all these pawns in the center. And for a human, it looks horrible. So instead, Duda plays knight to e2, and now I go queen to e7. Idea is very simple here. I want to take on d4. If white just plays, I don't know, a random move like rook h1, after pawn takes, white cannot take with the e pawn because you lose the knight on e2, and if you take with the knight, you lose the pawn on e3 as well. So I play queen e7, Duda plays rook e1, and now here I go pawn to c6. Obviously not the best move, but a simple move where I reinforce the knight on d5, but additionally I can now swing the bishop to b8 and try to create some batteries on this diagonal from b8 to h2. So Duda plays rook b2, and now I decide to take finally. He takes with the knight. I go queen to f6 here. White still cannot play e4, because after e4, I can take on d4 or even just take on c3, and even this is completely hopeless with this passed c-pawn. So instead rook b to b1 is played. I go pawn to g6, just a quiet move, stopping knight to f5. And also I now can play rook e7 and stack on the e-file, whereas if I play rook e7 right away, this probably doesn't work, but I always have to be wary of ideas like knight to f5. So I play g6 to stop knight f5. He goes king h1, I play rook d7, and now he plays rook to e2, trying to create his own double stack on the e-file. And now I decide to break the tension by taking the knight on d4. Of course, I didn't have to do this. I could have played rook e7 and maybe even bishop b8 to g3, which is probably also very, very good, because after f4, rook e4, I'm simply dominating. This knight is amazing on d5. White has all these weaknesses, and it's really only a matter of time until I crash through. But when I saw this position during the game, I thought, you know what? I've got this great outposted knight on d5, their weaknesses, and I saw a simple plan here to simplify where white should be lost. So I trade, I go rook e7, he goes queen f2, he cannot take on c4, because then I take on f3, and it's going to be checkmate. So he plays queen to f2, and now I have this nice move, knight f4. Now, I'm just in time here, because in this position, if white could get rook to e1 in, white is almost hanging on. Black is still better here, but white has pretty decent drawing chances. But I'm just in time with knight f4, because now if white goes rook e1, I have knight d3 with the fork of the queen and the rook. So he has to take, and after queen f4, he's also not in time, because now if he goes rook e1 to contest the e-file, I simply trade and take the pawn on f3. That being said, this would have been his best idea. He plays rook f1 instead, but now after rook e3, the pawns are very weak on c3 and f3. His king is very, very weak on h1 as well, and it's simply hopeless. So he goes queen takes h4. I play rook takes c3. Not the only move that wins, but it's probably the simplest, because now I have a passed c-pawn, and there are ideas like rook c2 or rook f3, and it's just game over. Duda checks, I go king g7, he plays king g2, and now I play rook c2 check, rook f2, I trade, and I play c3, and here Duda has to resign, because there are no checks. Like, even if you go queen e8, the e5 square is covered, so I simply go c2, and with c2, c1 coming up in the next two moves, I will get a second queen, and I will win the game very shortly thereafter. So Duda ends up resigning this fourth game, and with that, I have a clean sweep 4-0 on day one in the best of 8 quarterfinal match against Jan Krzysztof Duda from Poland. I only need a draw in the next 4 games to advance, so hopefully things will go well tomorrow, but you never know. So it's not over quite yet, but it's exactly the start that I wanted, and I'm very, very happy. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap here from Toronto, Canada, and I will be back tomorrow to do more recaps. It might be a short recap if it's only 1 or 2 games, but I will do a recap nonetheless. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're not already, and we'll be back very, very soon. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you. Bye.